Okay, it's great. Around 100 people last session. That's great. I was actually talking to Vanita Sharma. Is she here? She must be somewhere. Yeah. So I said, Vanita, would we have 100 people today? Because, and I think it was great when I came in this morning, I saw that the total number of people inside were 230, which was great for a Sunday. And yesterday we had more than 300 people, and I think that is great. So there were about 350 sign-ups, so I expected about 100 people will, typically in a conference, doesn't turn up. So I think the numbers were better, and all that what I've heard is that everybody is super excited, energized with all that they have learned from each other. So here we are, last panel, growing with care and building the foundation of social emotional learning. So I think, there is one thing that I said at my inaugural address yesterday morning, that learning does not actually begin, with learning, but it first begins when the children are feeling safe, connected, and, they actually connect to the environment and they feel that that's the place and those are the people that they can actually belong to. So, across the world, the education systems are recognizing more and more that social emotional learning is not an add-on, and it is the foundation of holistic development of children. And I think whether we talk about the SEL framework for UNESCO or you talk about the national education policy, I think there is a growing acknowledgement that empathy, resilience, and emotional regulation, relationship building, all of these are critical aspects of academic competencies. And I think the real question for the educators is not whether SEL matters. We know that it matters. We know that it's important. And it's how that we can intentionally put them in your school culture. And I think that's what we'll be talking about this afternoon. I've planned something for about 40 minutes. And I think it's great to have all of you here, each of you present and bring in a different perspective. Fiona, you've been in international schools and you're part of Wellington College, and Wellington has got so many different schools in different countries. So I think you bring in that perspective. Maybe, if you can just give me like a short context of where you're from and what you bring in, and then I'll sort of get each of you started with the questions. So let's start with you, Fiona.
Okay, now we're going to see whether it works. Does it work?
Yeah.
Excellent, okay. I'm Fiona Carter. I'm the International Director for Wellington International. I look after our international schools, and my region, which isn't my region now, just from September, because I'm looking after somewhere else, was India. And so I spent a lot of time in beautiful, wonderful Pune, founding our school there. And actually, our founding team, a good percentage of them came from our teams in China, including at the time, Mr. Conrad Botha. So, and certainly with early years, more than any other of our age phases, there are key pillars and elements which we managed to pick up and establish and bring to a new school. And of course, this area of development is central to all of that.
Okay, great. I think, Conrad, if I come to you next, tell me how it has been. You've been in, a different country, and now you're here. I think you've spent about a year, if I'm not wrong. A little bit more. And then tell us a little bit about how it is leading a school, a primary school, in India, in the context of what we are discussing. Yeah.
Thank you for the direction. My time now has been 3 years on and off. As Fiona said, I came over with Wellington College and first with as part of the founding team to establish the early years and also beginning of the junior school at the time. And then I left a little bit and came back with Heritage now to do the same thing because I couldn't get enough of struggles. I think anything to do with any new school is quite a lot. The challenges are always uniform across the world, but I think what makes India quite special is the passion and the drive behind the people wanting to do. So a lot of the work that we do, as Fiona said, the pillars that we bring over is first starting at developing the vision and the identity of what we're trying to establish as a community and as a school, and then slowly building up and recruiting, building teams, building capacity within that vision that's there. So that's a little bit where we're sitting with the work that we're doing at the moment. And even with Heritage, where we're now, this is the first school we're opening up outside of NCR. And anybody in India that you engage with will tell you how diverse the country is with different corners across that is there. So it's making sure that, again, the identity stays true, but it's also very contextualized to the essence of the community.
Well, you know, I joke with my colleagues in Delhi. I said, if you can run a school in Delhi, you can run it anywhere. And anybody who actually heads a school in Delhi, they know what I mean. I do not need to get into details of that. But I think, as you said, India, you know, is a huge country, and each region has its own, you know, uniqueness, if I may put it that way. Okay. Now, Shamin, if you can put in your context in terms of Ummeed and, you know, all that you do with children across schools, based out of Mumbai.
Yeah, thank you. And I know someone said it's Sunday morning and thank you all for being out of bed. It's Sunday afternoon and thank you all for being awake. So just want to say, yeah, it means a lot to have everyone here. But so Ummeed is an organization where we work with developmental disabilities, and while that seems like a big term, oftentimes, you know, when we talk to teachers, it's actually any sort of disability that occurs when the brain is still developing. So we're talking about the entire range, and what we see in schools, I mean, there's oftentimes when you hear the word disability, what comes to mind is things that you can see visually. But there's a whole bunch of disabilities that you can't see, and those are the kinds of disabilities we're talking about that present themselves in schools mainly. So you're talking about learning disabilities, you're talking about attention issues, which is ADHD, you're talking about autism. And, you know, we all know that with disability, oftentimes there are mental health concerns, right? The research has shown that kids and families with disability are just more perceptive and prone to having mental health concerns. So I think it becomes critical to do mental health work and social emotional work in school settings. And one of the things we do is we run something called a fellowship program, and where we actually train fellows who we call inclusion champions, and we put them in low-income, low-resourced schools. And the hope is then they start working and, you know, working with inclusive practices, teaching the school how to use inclusive practices. And one of the things, so I think when we think about mental health and social emotional learning, it's not just for the kids, it's also for the teachers. It has to cut across. I mean, we just spoke about, you know, Kavita was doing a session just before this where, you know, she spoke about how everybody needs to be involved if we need to make change, right? And so that's true. Everybody does need to be involved. And, you know, when we go into a school to talk to teachers, oftentimes, you know, they look at us saying, oh my God, like she's come again. Now she's going to tell us to do this, not to do this different, why are you doing this? And so we often start with just working with teachers' mental health. Because, you know, even on a plane, when you get into an aircraft, they tell you to wear your oxygen mask first and help yourself before you help other people. And the same is true of teachers in our classroom, right? They have to engage with social emotional learning. They have to feel safe. They have to be aware in order to, you know, for them to be available to their children. So, you know, we do, what we do in schools is have reflection spaces for teachers. And oftentimes, you know, when it started out, we found that then it was segregated time, but teachers would use that to finish correcting what they were not correcting, you know, finish their question papers, and do all the extra work that they were meant to do. But I think once they started actually using the space for what it was meant, it really, I think they saw value in it, because it is coming together to learn from one another. And it is coming together not just to share success stories, but also what's not working. The fact that you feel safe and you can talk about what's not working, you know, became really important. So we do that for teachers. For students, we have something called an inclusion club where it's usually, you know, led through, it's a story session. And we use books, like there are these amazing children's picture books. For instance, there's a book called Ruby's Worry that talks about anxiety. There's something called Who Stole Bhaiya's Smile that talks about, you know, children who are sad and, you know, experiencing depression. And those those are conversation starters, talking about what people are feeling, how kids are feeling, how teachers are feeling. So I think just bringing that into mainstream curriculum, because these are things that don't get spoken about. And then we also get schools to start an inclusion committee. And the committee actually comprises of teachers, school leaders, as well as kids, because you have to have kids invested in this system. In the disability world, there's a big movement which says nothing about us without us, but no one asks kids what they want their schools to be. No one asks kids what makes them feel safe in a classroom. No one asks kids, what they would like, as part of curriculum. And I think that's something we're trying to sort of get into conversation so that they feel a little bit more part of the decision-making process and they just feel, a sense of agency.
Thank you, thank you. Your opening remarks now, Kavita.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. So I think I am an educator and a social entrepreneur, and sometimes it's not easy to be both those things. One kind of we work with schools who want to change, who want to make a positive change. Schools that are ambitious, schools that want to, really become child-centered. And that obviously means a lot of social emotional learning that comes into play, but we don't make it into a separate program. So what we look at is, does the school in every way possible, whether it comes to policies, the leadership and management, or the teaching and learning, does it incorporate the idea that this school is meant for children? That we are all here because the children are here. And we're not here because it's an adult, space. Although a lot of the times schools do feel like they are adult conveniences because they start at a particular time, end at a particular time, and they structure themselves in the way that an adult would prefer. But I think that for us, we kind of want to bring in student voice, and that's what we do through the work that we are doing in terms of school review. The children are very much a part of the review process. They sit at the table with teachers and school leaders, and it's a very interesting thing to see that they have the best ability to really see their school and to show it to the others. And really with enormous loyalty, with a lot of affection, they love their school, but they can see it the way that you really need to if you want to make change happen. And that's very helpful for the people who are their teachers, leaders, and parents. And so that's our real trust. We believe in students' voice. We believe that they have a say. And that's how we do things. Yeah.
Thank you. So that's great. Vicky, give your context, where you're from and what you're doing currently here for the rest of the audience, please.
So my name's Victoria. I have worked in a number of countries, and I am going to say that India is by far my favorite. It is, you look at the people who are here on a Sunday afternoon, still awake, because of their commitment to education and their commitment to the children of this country. So give yourselves
give
a
all
pat
of
on the
yourselves
back.
a big hand, please. Thank you.
I have the littlest learners. I think I represent the youngest learners here sitting on this panel, because our children are 0 to 3, and they are just at those beginning stages of developing their agency. They are just at the beginning stages of seeing themselves as an individual, so they are just learning. And with big thanks to the teachers at my school, they are learning to individuate, to navigate, to recognize their feelings so that they can regulate themselves and move on to do learning through the other parts of the school.
Thank you, Vicky. So I think it's great. We have got 2 teachers, one from basically a school which is 6 months to 3 years, and that's Vicky. Conrad in a primary school. We have got Fiona, who have been looking at primary schools in different continents, different countries. And then we have got Shamin and Kavita, who bring in a different perspective. Shamin in terms of how social and emotional learning and special needs are brought into schools, and Kavita when you're looking at schools in context of policies and sort of wholesomeness. So that's a great panel. Let's start my question. I'll start with you, Vicky. So Little Nest is a school for toddlers which is based on child-centered, play-based approach. It nurtures confidence, empathy, And, how do you intentionally weave social and emotional learning for toddlers in everyday classroom?
I think Monita had mentioned, it was either this morning or yesterday, that one of our KPIs is joy. And so everything starts with that idea of building up towards the children having that sense of contentment. They walk in the door, there's a kindness code. The teachers are aware of that. They're at the door to greet them, which is building that sense of community. When they're talking with the children, they're helping them navigate, recognize their emotions. We have an occupational therapist who's sitting there, and something she does when the children have trouble when they have trouble regulating their emotions, she goes back to the beginning of that journey with them, which is to recognize it. And for our little ones, that's your face is red, your shoulders are up, I think you might be angry. And that conversation in that moment helps them build the knowledge next time so that they can begin that. It's a big journey to recognize your emotions. And I mean, Mansa's here because me as a grown-up am navigating stage fright. So thank you, Mansa. But it's something we never stop doing. And so we start with the littlest ones, and the teachers are talking to them every day about their feelings. They come in, they're greeted at the door, they go to their class, they do a check-in, they do an emotion meter, because this is new for them. For us, it's like, oh yeah, that's cute. But for them, it's a new thing that they have to learn and recognize and use. And then you see it in the playground. And they're having negotiations with their friends, and they're organizing play dates in Goa because we have a boat and they're going to sail away. And these are the kind of things that our teachers honor through the curriculum. They weave it into their play, and they help them role play some of those negotiations that are part of everyday life. So I would say that's how we do it.
Thank you. I think you've beautifully highlighted how SEL lives within everyday classroom moments. And I think building on this, let me shift the lens a little bit from classroom practice to leadership and system level thinking. So Fiona, question for you is, across the Wellington College International Schools that you support, how have you seen SEL principles translate into early years and primary classroom cultures? And what leadership practices and PD approaches have helped to embed SEL into everyday teaching and learning?
I think principally, not just at Wellington, but when I worked kind of for DFE, for government, for other schools before, it's been about understanding those developmental milestones of social and emotional behaviour, and also seeing that it's absolutely central to every other area of learning which a child will develop. You know, there's been, as we know, lots of research over the years, which is certainly in England has influenced English policy in the early years, so that self-regulation now is an early learning goal, because it's recognised that those children who are not achieving a good level of development by age 5, one of the barriers is self-regulation and being able to communicate that self-regulation. Very much so, certainly at Wellington, that whole vision of the child, you know, a child being competent and capable and born curious, and wanting to be part of a social community and work together. That's not something we teach them. That's something they want to do. But I think often not often, but sometimes we can put barriers up against that, and the way we establish our environments, our rhythm of the day, you know, telling children to stop doing whatever they're doing because now it's a certain time to do it, and that's when children get frustrated. So it's thinking about typical child behaviour, and then setting up your provision from actually what's in the classroom to systems of accountability. So, for instance, at Wellington now, when all our schools report to their head teacher and then to the overall board, they will report on levels of personal, social and emotional development, even from our 2-year-olds, whether they are emerging, developing, secure, or exceeding their age and stage of development. Ahead of that, there's had to be standardisation. We've had to agree what we mean that looks like. What does that look like for a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old? You know, but I'm a real believer that if you have a vision to deliver really great education that supports a child's social and emotional development, you have to measure it and you have to be accountable for how well you do it. And as many of I said it in my session earlier today, many of our senior school leaders are senior school practitioners. And so sometimes we have to speak their language in terms of saying what's important and how, because that, as a head teacher, people are always asking you for money and always asking you to change systems and more staff. So we have to be accountable for doing that. So I think it's a non-negotiable. It's a non-negotiable that we have to support that in our children, and that we have to do it from the way that we interact with children, the way we listen to them, the way we establish our environments.
Okay, I want to follow up, here with you. I think, when you're looking at multiple schools and we're looking at children going through the years, how do you think leaders can sustain SEL when the academic pressures, built in? In context of, your educational experience through, and maybe you can look at continents on how things are different across the world.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you have to, as much as, we have a certain view of what is important for children and the freedoms they should have and the autonomies they should have, then parents may have a different view, which may be to do with that parent or may be to do with culturally. So in terms of children having a voice, in terms of children speaking whilst they're eating, having a conversation, in terms of children feeding themselves, all of those things, we think, of course, that's really important. But to some of our parents, particularly in Southeast Asia, that's seen not far off as neglect, because we're not feeding them and we're not doing it for them. I think you have to stand up for your principles. I think that's important, and we will often say, particularly in the early years, and Conrad will know this as having had many, many conversations with parents about to choose a Wellington, sometimes saying, well, maybe this isn't the school for you, because this is what we expect your children to be able to do. We see them as highly competent, independent learners, but they will sometimes get upset. They will sometimes have to negotiate and self-regulate, but that's what we believe makes the adults we want to churn out into the world at 18 years old.
Yeah, and with experience and with interactions over the years, I just feel that more and more of all the problems that we have is because of the disconnect within the families. Because I think the parents and the children, they just want to move in different expectations, and it's just that there isn't a sort of alignment in the directions that they're thinking. And I think, and we all know that if the mind is not clear, you're not going to be able to connect and focus on things that you do.
And I think as educators, we sometimes assume parents know.
Yeah.
So, a really good example might be a child who you take them to a bookshop and they're having a lovely old time and you're sitting and reading books, and then you say, but we've got to go now because, my car park's going to run out, and the child gets upset. And then a parent might think they're being naughty, but they're just getting upset because they're having a great time and they don't understand. And that's the only way when you're 3 to tell anyone that is to cry and to stomp. And it's reassuring parents of those developmental milestones, of that's okay, but this is how the best way to avoid that difficult, upsetting outburst for the child is to distract, is to look at the triggers. So I think we can't assume that parents know what we know. So as much as you can inform ahead of time, the better.
Yeah. Thank you, Fiona, for these leadership insights. I think I'll move on to Shamin now. And Shamin, if you could describe a specific SEL-focused initiative or a program that your organization has implemented, maybe in different settings, give us 2 or 3 different settings, and how, and the outcomes that you have achieved with the children and the families.
Yeah, I think, we bring in SEL into everything we do, right? So in schools, like I said, we do the inclusion clubs, which are, reading sessions. We have reflection spaces for the teachers. We have inclusion committees. And this happens across all different kinds of schools. So a lot of low-income schools, a lot of government schools. So it happens in every setting. And I think it is a little bit about mindset. So I think that's what we try to bring in because it is about wanting to make that change. It is about believing that that change is possible. And, oftentimes when we go to schools and we say, do you have children with diversity in your classroom? Do you talk about mental health? Do you do things on SEL? A lot of schools will say, we don't need all this. We don't have kids who are different. We're just, we just have kids who are typically developing. And I think that's where the mindset...
The most common thing that I've heard, they're too young.
They're too young.
Too young to have any differences.
Yeah.
I think we'll manage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just sort of an idea of pushing it under the carpet.
Absolutely.
And this is where it should start.
Yeah.
It should start, the earlier the better.
Absolutely.
Because then it compounds.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't think kids are too young or they don't know. I think we just don't ask kids enough. I think the idea is that their head and their brain is like, a piece of sponge where you just keep giving and it just keeps filling and absorbing. It doesn't happen that way. So I think it is just starting conversations to bring about a shift in mindset, because it is truly, what people want to make happen. And then when we go to schools and then they say, we can't do this, this happens only in the West, right? Because they have money, they have resources, they can do this. And which is why we actually very intentionally work with the government schools and low-income schools, because sometimes it's really simple things. I mean, one of the things that we try and do in schools, high-end, BMC, low-income private, is just talk about something simple as circle time. Now, a lot of primary schools use circle time as a means for language development. We say use circle time to do SEL things. Talk about mental health, talk about gender, talk about sexuality, talk about so many different things, talk about things that don't get spoken about in mainstream curriculum. And we've seen it's immense in terms of once schools start doing it, they then, schedule it in. Initially, they're reluctant to sort of do some of these things. I think when people start feeling the value of it is when it becomes more sustainable, and it takes time. So I think, one thing is just to be perseverant and ensure that things are being done. Oftentimes we'll have schools saying, we tried this for 2-3 months, nothing happened. 2-3 months is not enough. Your school has been in existence for 20-30 years. 2-3 months is not going to cut it to make a change. So I think sometimes just being perseverant in trying some of these different things, because really it just comes down to good teaching pedagogy and good teaching practice. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a powerful perspective, and I think it also reminds us that SEL is deeply relational, and how school culture and daily routines intentionally nurtures those into across our learning environment. I think I'll come to Conrad now. And Conrad, as a founding head of an experiential learner-centered school, how have you intentionally designed school culture, routines, and adult-child interactions, which would then nurture SEL alongside academics in a primary setting?
That's a question for Spokey. He was there before me. He set the culture we're trying to replicate. Our school is very unique. We have a very unique identity, a very unique practice, experiential learning. And as much as we can say it what it is very deeply much rooted in our identity and who we are. We have also a very strong set of dharmas that we follow. The school has been in existence for over 20 years, and these dharmas are really a way of life and the way people respond to each other, the conversations they have, how they interact, how policies are written, how the school systems are set up. So that's very much ingrained in the organization. Now, our school is outside of that. We're brand new. We're also in a very different part of India, as I said earlier. So we need to really sit and look at our context, the essence that make us who we are in Pune. We then start unpicking and we say, all right, well, these are the things that has worked well in the schools. We try and identify why they have worked well and if that is really relevant to who we are in Pune. At the same time, we also have an influx of people joining. We have teams joining us every Monday. We have new people joining as well. And by the Friday, you think you've sort of figured out a new rhythm, and then new voices come in on the Monday, and you're back to the drawing board again, and the same conversations and topics keep on picking up and coming up, and new direction, and new thoughts, and new challenges. And I'm sure anybody else in India will know in any school, the PRPO system is also a nightmare to deal with. It takes about 3 months to get payment done. So it's also looking at how we build systems to support the voice and the agency of the people we want to develop in their independent thinking. And this is really important because when you shape culture, you can't allow the organicness of it to influence your strategy of it. You need to intentionally set the rhythm, set the culture, set the personality, set the relationship, set the values into action about how you see this filtering through to your parents that you engage with before you even see the students coming into campus for the first time. And then from there, we start building outward. We look at the curriculum that's in there as well and how we adapt that again to our local culture and context. How do we interpret that curriculum into the resources we bring into our classrooms? Because all of these unsaid things that we see and feel around us influence about who we are as people and our view that we have on the world. So that's the approach that we're currently taking at Heritage, is really understanding the core, the identity of what Heritage is, looking at how we're building that new baby that's in that family value system that's there, but then also how we make it tangible, practical, and achievable for the teams on the ground to achieve that and take that further.
I think one follow-up to you that, what kind of teacher support do you think is essential to sustain an SEL-rich experiential learning education system?
Very good question. I think we're all here today trying to uncover all of those things as well and trying to influence that thinking. The approach in our school, and I'll go back to that first because I think that's important to understand. We believe that we're building humans for a future that is uncertain and something that we don't know. We focus on certain skills, Education 4.0, Education 2030, the competencies that we see in learners, whether that be empathy, self-awareness, looking at innovation, looking at how we can be curious about the world. And the humans that we want to send into the world need to be prepared for that. So SEL plays a major role in that. Because to be able to understand how to be confident in taking risks and taking chances, we need to be able to fail. We need to be able to have that on a day-to-day. When I build a tower of blocks in the earliest classroom and a friend comes and knocks it over, my immediate reaction will be crying and shoving and all that. But to teach our children that this is part of that process, the vocabulary that goes with it, a deep understanding of self and how I can think about overcoming that challenge is the skills that we filter in from a young age. Now that's really important because also what happens in our schools quite a lot from an experience perspective, this is what we filter through every age phase as well. There's a problem, there's a challenge, there's a real context to it, and then we figure out how we can build the capacities within the children around that. To bring it back into our own practices with the educators and how we develop them is to really first understand an alignment on the values and the vision that they have. And once we have that commonality there, we start building the capacity within them to deliver the curriculum, deliver the approaches, to have that understanding of responsiveness. Deep level.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Kavita, to you, drawing on your work, which is evaluating and supporting schools, quality across diverse contexts, what indicators do you look for to assess whether social emotional learning is genuinely embedded, or it is treated as a standalone program, or it is a tick box?
Yeah. So I think we look at the relationships really between the children, between the teachers and the children. We look at policies like, for example, whether they have a child protection committee. But the committee isn't just a tick box, like you said, and it shouldn't be, it never should be. But is it proactive? Does it sort of go out and actually have conversations with children, with teachers to find out what's going on? Whether there are processes.
By tick box, I just wanted to intervene here. I wanted to say that I have also done like so many accreditations, and you go in there and you can feel through conversations that it is happening, but it is happening for compliance, but not for anything else.
But that's I think the reason why we have children in the team is because they'll tell you that. So they tell you that, look, it just started yesterday. Or we put up these posters, the norms in our classroom, we did it yesterday. And that's something that they'll tell you not because they're being disloyal, but because they really know that this isn't happening. The other thing that you can tell when you sit in a classroom is when say, for example, there's pair work or group work that's been started off, you can see that children don't know what they're supposed to do. How are they supposed to work together? And so they'll sit in a circle, but they'll all do individual work. And that's immediately you can tell that they don't have collaboration. That isn't the safe space for them to do that. So I think it is definitely possible to see this, to identify it, because we do triangulation. We have 4 methods of evidence collection. We look at what do children write in their books. Is there anything at all that says that they can think for themselves, that they write their own answers? Is it the same answer in every child's book, which means it's copied straight from the board? So those kinds of things are very easy to find. When you have conversations with the children, the best part about having children in your team is when you're talking with children, they are talking to their peers. So the way in which they conduct that conversation is completely different. And the principal asking the same question would not get those answers. Yeah? So it's super important to understand that it's not possible to hide things or pretend. And also that it's useless doing that because it's not going to have an impact at all on the children. I think that schools that truly work between assessments, reviews, or whatever that they go through as a process for checking their progress, are the ones that you can see it in the fabric of their relationships and the way they work with each other, the way the children respond to them, the way the children greet the teacher. Although you might be standing at the door, if you've not done that on a regular, ongoing basis, then the way the child will speak to you at the door is going to be totally different than when you've done that constantly. So I think to be a good observer is part of being an assessor, and we are teaching schools to do their own assessments, so it's not as if we are going as a third party. The whole point is to make it safe also for schools to do the assessment. We are not putting those results out on any websites. We're not trying to say that you're good or not great. What we're saying is, do you know yourself really well? And do you know your students really well? And that comes through. Right? And the minute you are talking about social emotional learning, you're talking about whether children are seen, whether they are heard, and that comes through in everything from the gate to the time when they have assemblies, to the time when they're moving from one class to another. You can see it in the way the prefectorial system is set up. You can see if you have children being set up as police people for their own colleagues, or whether they're set up as people who can support and help each other. So it's really evident, and we would love to be able to show you more of how that works, because we have a lot of what does good look like becoming evident now in schools, and that's delightful. So I think that's what really makes a difference.
Thank you, Kavita, so much. Vicky, the next question is for you. Could you tell us what sort of capacity building strategies can help build SEL competencies, in regards to emotional awareness, conflict resolution, collaborative play, in the context that you have worked, not currently, but through your work life?
So I'd say there's common elements, whether it's here or there, or in previous places. The biggest element for building capacity is, are we using it as a team? Are we modeling, especially for social emotional? I used the example before that, I'm nervous under the bright lights and my team were there. You heard one of them cheer me when I came on, and that was just her way of saying, hey, I'm here for you. And that our ability to recognize ourselves as human and to support each other to navigate all those ups and downs of humanity is number one. Can I stand in my emotions? Can I be with you in yours? Can we label them? Can we work with them? Can we go on? So being willing to be human with our team and being able to recognize and handle those emotions. What's unique in this age group that my other age groups didn't have is that our little ones have very big feelings, and they don't always have the vocabulary to navigate those feelings, so they'll negotiate like a lawyer, and they can't actually explain to you why they need that so desperately. As they get older, then the teachers need more skill to recognize what they're not saying. And that's the biggest one. Can we recognize, I know when I worked in upper primary, in schools that had upper primary, we needed to recognize the delicacy of emotion. And sometimes it's for somebody on our staff. And so upskilling people to recognize and handle emotions, I think that is the #1 driver for building success. And that's why people like you are doing what you do.
Thank you, Vicky. Fiona, as an educator and an expert in educational assessments, you've seen challenge of measuring competencies such as social emotional development. You were talking a little bit about that, of how different schools need to calibrate the stuff. So could you tell us what approaches effectively captures the SEL growth while remaining practical and supportive to the teachers in different contexts?
I think it's two-part. I think the first part is that, as I've said a bit earlier, as a staff team, I think you have to agree on, in old-fashioned speak, we used to talk about ages and stages, but about those building blocks and stages of child development. So by the time they enter the next age phase, what would you expect a child to be able to do, to be able to talk about before they go into that age? Now, we know children don't learn in a linear fashion. It doesn't mean they have to do A before B. But I do think you need to have a stake in the ground about what you would hope, if you think of that flight path, what you would hope that child is showing in their behaviours by age 2, by age 3, by age 4. And once you've developed that as a staff team, and it has to be as a staff team that you recognise that and people understand that. And we've got, of course, certainly in our schools, we have, in everybody's school, but particularly international schools, you have a huge range of people who've come from different training backgrounds in terms of understanding levels of child development. Was it in their training? Was it not? So sometimes you have to support with that. Once you've got that matrix almost, then the second part is standardising that, because you can't then rush into assessing it. So if, I don't know, if I'm thinking of a simple standard, if one standard might be a child asks for help, then that's different. What would you expect a 2-year-old to demonstrate and do that? Do they have to verbalise it? On my mind, no. But for a 4 or 5-year-old, maybe we decide, yes, we would not verbalise it, because that's what we want for the pupils in our school. And so that, and it's that kind of, it's weaving together assessment and then thinking, how will I intentionally teach that? And then, is there a curriculum for that? And curriculum is not curriculum assessment are not dirty words in early years. It just means, but they're really complex and they're intricate. 2 years ago now, we talked about learning behaviours. You may have heard in the earliest foundation stage, there was something called characteristics of effective learning, and certainly when that first came out, we said that's not. It's not progressive. A child either has that characteristic or not. We worked with someone called Jan de Biel a couple of years ago, said actually it is progressive. Asking for help looks different. Self-regulation looks different when you're 2 than when you're 3, when you're 4. And if we recognise that, then we need to create conditions where we teach that. And then go back to my first point, we have to then report that to show we're accountable for it. And if there are gaps in social and emotional learning, is that because the children can't do it? Or is it that we're not supporting it very well and we're not identifying children early in terms of those gaps? So I think reporting, but first of all, you've got to decide what are those ages and stages, and then measuring those in a completely age-appropriate fashion and not on an iPad.
Shamin and Ummeed, how do you engage with parents and caregivers in reinforcing SEL skills at home? And what strategies do you give them to building resilience and emotional well-being?
So I think, the kind of families we see at Ummeed are different in the sense, when you think of cultural context, I don't think a lot of Indians are used to answering the question, how do you feel? We don't get asked that question. It's definitely not taught in most of the mainstream schools. And, I think back, because I'm a mental health practitioner, I think back to a family that I was working with where we were talking, the mum had a child on the spectrum and a really difficult home environment. And we spoke about a couple of things and I said, how do you feel about this? And she looked at me and said, uska matlab kya hai? Which means, what do you mean by that? And I was aghast because she had never been asked how she feels about anything. This was a 30-year-old woman who's never been asked this question. And so I think it really, took me back to how do we start talking about what we feel, right? Like, if you ask a lot of even kids in today's day and age, or a lot of us as adults right now, how are you feeling? You will get happy, bad, mad, sad. You'll get those kinds of words because we don't have the vocabulary to actually talk about how we're feeling. We don't get asked to articulate how we're feeling. And it's amazing to see that at least in the newer schools, in the international schools, that is really being put in to start from day one, right? We're building on that very intentionally. But I think for a lot of the families we see, they haven't seen that. So for us, it's a lot of just starting the conversation and trying to normalize the fact that it's okay to talk about this. It's okay to say that I'm not, feeling okay. When you see, even culturally, when you have a mother with a small little girl and a small little boy, if the boy falls down and starts crying, they'll say, oh, come on, don't get up, you're a strong boy. Crying has nothing to do with strength. So you're not even, sometimes, and they're not doing it so that they suppress, what this child is feeling. They're doing it because they want to try and motivate this kid to get on. So the intention behind it is very different, but I think the way it comes out sometimes restricts then how we think about how we're, feeling, and then what we say about how we're feeling. So I really feel the starting point is just conversation, to get people to start talking about what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and know that it's okay to talk about this. So that's a large part of what we reinforce with families at Ummeed, because we really get them to start talking and be part of the dialogue.
Conrad, your question. Reflection and real-world problem solving. How do you think it can help children develop empathy and emotional regulation?
Oh, that was not on my schedule, but thank you. Reflection and real-world problem solving for children developing empathy. Empathy is such a powerful emotion, and I think in today's world it is so, it's probably for me, I think, one of the most important things. If we think of the AI world, if you think of all of these things, I was just having a comment on this earlier where I said, please, this is not an AI activity. You need to write this from your own observations and skill and your interpretation thereof. It is really to look at how empathy places us in the position of the context that we are in while we're taking our observation. And what happens with AI at the moment, it is so quick, so easy. We can quickly write a lesson plan. We can quickly write a report. We can quickly write, a manual on how we do things. But what we are missing is the empathy in placing that into our context, understanding how the people in that context will respond to that messaging coming through and how we build that into the opportunities that that document should be doing. Lesson planning in particular is of critical emphasis on empathy there, because ChatGPT doesn't know our children. They don't know the emotions. They don't know the well-being they're going through. They don't know the morning when they came to school without having breakfast, or mum and dad having had an argument at home. And in our classes where we have 30, 40 children, how are you going to ask 30, 40 questions for that lesson plan to be adapted? So to make sure that we first foster that skill within our teachers working with our children for them to understand so that they can communicate this effectively in the modern world to our children, in the real world context, is where I say where the key sits and how we can build that in a nutshell.
So the last question is for Kavita, and given the challenge that we have in making SEL visible and actionable for schools, how can assessment and reflections tools support emotional well-being, relationships, and inclusion in a school context?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, the intention of a school.
And I think if we can look at actually genuinely doing it rather than ticking check boxes and checklists.
Exactly, yeah. That's what I was going to say. The intention of the school has to be clear, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to do this just to get some kind of a tick on a box, then, I mean, it's a lot of waste of money. Because it's really going to not make any difference to the children or to your teachers or to your school. So if you if the intention is that we want to have a school that's truly child-centered, and it actually includes every single child, and that's the focus is on the word every, right? Everybody who's in your school deserves equal attention and equal equally must see your school as a space that is safe and inclusive. So I think if, that is where really you could look at many ways of looking at, at a diagnostic for yourself. You could look at a framework that has this in it. But what is important is to approach that with the idea that if it is not happening, that you would really want to do something about it. Then please go ahead and do that kind of a review and make that work for yourself. But if it's just to be done for compliance, then I think most of you will do it the way I've seen. Sometimes people actually just hand over a particular framework to their computer teacher and says, just upload whatever you want to. And that's really not going to help you at all. Some of the diagnostics are very good. They have inclusion as a focus or child protection as a focus. So please pick up on those, which really, it depends on, like I said, what you want to achieve. And so choose wisely what your performance areas are going to be, and then do the review with a completely sincere approach. And believe me, it is an eye-opener, not just for your teachers, but for your leaders, your managers, everybody. Because if everybody does this together, looks at the school together, the common language that develops of this is where we are, this is what we've understood, and the common goal that emerges, that this is where we want to go, then everyone is aligned, and then there's a huge movement that we've seen. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Thank you.
Don't do it.
Vanita, I don't think we have time for questions, do we? No. So I'll quickly sum it up. I think if I want to just bring in top 3 points, I would say that social emotional learning is not a curriculum strand, but it's rather a culture of a learning environment. And I think it is reflected by how adults in that whole environment is actually listening, responding, and designing experiences which would model relationships. The second point, I would say that SEL would thrive where the adults actually themselves feel supported, because they're the starting point where it all starts, and emotionally equipped. So capacity building is not professional development, but it's actually adding to an environment which can be professionally nurturing, and therefore, being a school which would be able to deal with those issues. And I think the third one that I would say that it challenges us to move beyond checklists, and it challenges us to move towards observations and authentic evidence of relationships between children, giving them agency, giving them so that they can talk about their well-being and where they are comforted in their learning environment. I think more organic that we are, the better I feel it is. So thank you, all of you, for being here and sharing your candid views. I had a piece of paper. I'm very uncomfortable when I have to do this, but when I have 5 people, I can't put all those questions in my head. But thank you so much. Thank you. Good.